There is a town in Missouri where the population is 5, not 5,000, 5 people. It sits on the shore of a lake. It is where one of the most famous writers in American history was born, and today you could probably walk its entire footprint in under 2 minutes. It is real, it is findable on a map, and it is the last stop on this list. Somewhere between there and here, we are going to walk the shoreline of a dozen lakes most Americans have never heard of, in a state most retirement lists skip right over. And by the end, you will understand why people on a fixed Social Security check are quietly moving to the water instead of away from it. This is not about the famous stretch of shoreline everybody already knows. Missouri has 7 major man-made lakes, and the state exempts Social Security income from state tax entirely, which means a fixed monthly check goes further here than it does in almost any coastal retirement destination. This is about the 12 towns hiding just past the famous shoreline, from a county seat with 9,000 people down to a village so small it almost stopped being a village at all. Stick around, because that 5-person town at number 1 is going to change how you think about what a place actually needs to be a home. If small towns like this are new to you, go ahead and hit subscribe now, because we are about to cover a lot of ground together, and I would genuinely love to know where in the world you are watching from tonight. Drop it in the comments. Now, let's get into the list. Number 12 is Clinton, a county seat of a little over 9,000 people, sitting near the northern edge of Truman Lake in Henry County. Clinton anchors one end of a 55,000-acre reservoir built and managed by the Army Corps of Engineers, and its historic downtown square, one of the largest of its kind in the state, is lined with Victorian and Italianate buildings from the 19th century that never got torn down for something newer. The square carries National Historic District status, and locals will tell you it is one of the rare small-town squares in Missouri that still functions as a real commercial center rather than a museum piece. It is the biggest town on this list, which is exactly why it earns the final spot instead of a higher one. It has real infrastructure, real doctors, a functioning hospital system, and lake access that never quite gets the attention of the more famous Ozark waters an hour south. On the money side, the median home value in Clinton runs right around $223,000, with typical rents landing near $1,000 a month. Numbers that put a Social Security check within real striking distance, especially split between 2 people. The trade-off is that Clinton is the least private option on this list, with over 9,000 neighbors, instead of the handful you will find further down this countdown. For a retiree who wants small-town scale without giving up services, Clinton is the entry point into everything else we are about to cover. Because from here, the towns only get smaller, the price tags only get lower, and the lakes only get quieter. Number 11 takes us northwest, away from the Ozarks entirely, to Maryville, home to roughly 12,000 people and a lake that did not exist before 1991. Mozingo Lake was built specifically as a water supply reservoir for the city, finished in 1992. And today it anchors a 3,000-acre recreation park with an award-winning 18-hole golf course, 8 furnished cabins, a public beach, and 26 miles of shoreline that most of the country has simply never heard of. What makes Maryville worth including is what sits next to that lake, a full 4-year university that opens its classrooms to local seniors at no cost when space allows. That is not a marketing line. It is a standing policy, and it means retirement here can come with a lecture hall attached if you want one. The lake was engineered, not inherited from a river valley the way most Ozark lakes were, and that gives Maryville a flatter, quieter kind of water than anything else on this list. Financially, Maryville runs a median home value right around $220,000, with rent estimates ranging from the low 700s up toward 900 a month depending on the source, and an overall cost of living index that sits meaningfully below the national average. The catch is that Maryville is a college town first and a lake town second, which means traffic, noise, and housing demand all spike around the university calendar in ways a purely residential lake village never will. But quiet, engineered water was never going to be the strangest thing we found here. The next stop gets a great deal smaller and a great deal stranger. Number 10 is Sunrise Beach, a village of a little over 400 people tucked into the Lake of the Ozarks region in Camden County. The post office here has been running since 1932, back when the lake itself was still brand new, having been formed only a few years earlier through the construction of Banyel Dam on the Osage River. Sunrise Beach never grew the way Lake Ozark or Osage Beach did just down the shoreline. It stayed a village, technically, on paper, even as the lake around it became one of the busiest recreational bodies of water in the Midwest. What that means today is a resident base under 500 people sitting on the same 1,100 plus miles of shoreline that draws millions of visitors every summer, without the density or the price tag of the towns that get all the headlines. The village sits within easy driving distance of Osage Beach for groceries and specialty medical care. Estimates on Sunrise Beach's median home value vary depending on the source, landing anywhere from the low 190s up to around $230,000, with median rent closer to $1,100 or $1,200 a month. A reminder that even the quiet corners of this lake are not immune to lakefront pricing once you get close to the water's edge. It is proof that on this lake, distance from the marina strip can matter more than distance from the water itself, though a shrinking year-round population also means fewer full-time neighbors and a longer wait if you ever need a plumber in January. Number 9 pushes that idea even further with Gravois Mills, a town of roughly 130 people on the Gravois Creek arm of the Lake of the Ozarks in Morgan County. This is about as far as you can get from a crowd while still technically being lakefront in central Missouri. 9 miles north sits Versailles, the county seat, and 12 miles south sits Sunrise Beach, which means Gravois Mills exists in the gap between two other small towns, a pocket most visitors drive straight through without stopping. It sits close to Jacob's Cave, one of the show caves that riddle this part of the Ozark Plateau, and its marinas and boat docks serve a population so small that most residents know each other by name and by boat slip. If Sunrise Beach felt quiet, Gravois Mills is what quiet looks like when you take away almost everyone else, and yet the same lake, the same shoreline, and the same clear water are all still right there. The listing data here is a genuine warning sign for anyone budgeting carefully. With so few homes ever changing hands, median price figures swing wildly, from fixer-uppers listed around $215,000 to waterfront estimates pushing well past $500,000. So a buyer here has to shop the actual listings rather than trust any single average. Number 8 brings us to a town with a history none of the others on this list can quite match. Because Forsyth was not simply built on a lake, it was moved for one. Forsyth sits on Lake Taneycomo in Taney County, with a population of about 2,700 people, and it has served as the county seat since the town's earliest days, back when it was the head of navigation for steamboats working their way up the White River before the Civil War. But in the late 1940s, the federal government began planning Bull Shoals Dam roughly 80 miles downstream, and engineers realized the reservoir it would create was going to swallow the original town site at the mouth of Swan Creek. So, in the early 1950s, Forsyth relocated. The historic courthouse was taken apart stone by stone and hauled off to help build structures at the School of the Ozarks nearby. And a new town rose 2 miles west on higher ground that had once been a golf course, the Forsyth that stands today, looking out at Bull Shoals Lake and the trout-famous waters of Taneycomo, as if it had always been there. Almost nothing about the original town remains except the name and the will to keep it going. Homes here list at a median right around $240,000, reasonable for a county seat on 2 lakes, though buyers should know that flood history is part of the deal in a town that has literally already been relocated once because of rising water. And the next entry does not carry a dramatic backstory like that one. What it carries instead is a kind of stubborn smallness that almost defies explanation. Number 7 is Kimberling City, a 4th-class city of about 2,300 people, directly on the shore of Table Rock Lake in Stone County. It is named for the Kimberling family, who once operated a ferry crossing here before the lake existed. Table Rock Lake itself is considered one of the best bass fisheries in the country, and Kimberling City sits close enough to Branson to make day trips easy, but far enough removed that it keeps its own identity instead of becoming an extension of the tourist strip. The Port of Kimberling Marina anchors daily life here in a way that a highway exit never could, and the town functions all year, not just during peak season, which separates it from a lot of lake communities that empty out every winter. It is small enough that the local police department reportedly hosts informal coffee mornings where residents can sit down and talk directly with the chief. Try finding that kind of access in a city of any real size. The number that matters most here is the median home value, estimated around $272,000, with gross rent averaging under $900 a month. Prices that sit noticeably below what you would pay for equivalent lake access closer to Branson itself. Number 6 stays on the same lake but drops the population even further at Shell Knob, an unincorporated community along the north shore of Table Rock Lake, straddling Berry and Stone counties. Because it has never incorporated as a city, Shell Knob has no municipal government of its own. And yet it still functions as an active lake resort community with more than 1,000 residents scattered along its coves. The White River arm of Table Rock Lake runs right past it, and a bluff overlooking that arm hosts a public recreation site locals describe as feeling more like a private park than a public one. Living somewhere that has chosen deliberately not to become an official city is its own kind of statement. And for retirees drawn to lower property taxes and a lighter administrative footprint, that choice can translate directly into a lighter monthly bill. The trade-off shows up in the housing numbers themselves. The median home value here runs higher than several other towns on this list, around $321,000, with rent near $1,300 a month. Proof that lack of city government does not automatically mean lower prices once a lake community becomes desirable enough. What comes next takes that same idea and pushes it into territory that is barely a town at all. Number 5 is Climax Springs, and if the name alone has not caught your attention yet, the story behind it will. A post office called simply Climax opened here in Camden County in 1883, renamed Climax Springs 3 years later after a nearby mineral spring that local tradition says an early settler discovered and celebrated by shouting that it capped the climax. The springs themselves have since faded, but the name stuck, and so did a tiny aging population, recorded at just 118 residents in the 2020 census. In 2015, Climax Springs formally disincorporated, giving up its status as an official village altogether, something that happens to very few American towns, and usually only when a community has shrunk past the point where running a local government still makes sense. What remains is a loose scattering of homes about 6 miles from the Lake of the Ozarks, still folded into the same Camdenton school district that serves the much bigger towns nearby. Still quiet, still almost invisible on a map, and now technically not even a town in the legal sense anymore, just a place people still choose to call home. Pricing data here is thin and inconsistent, since so few homes ever sell, with some listings under $100,000 and others well into the mid-six figures for lakefront lots, which means the only reliable strategy is working directly with a local agent instead of trusting an online estimate. Number 4 takes us to Stockton, the county seat of Cedar County, with a population of about 1,700 people sitting beside Stockton Lake, a 24,000-acre reservoir the Army Corps of Engineers completed by damming the Sac River in the late 1960s. What is easy to miss about this town is how many names it went through before Stockton stuck. It was originally platted as Lancaster in 1846, renamed Fremont the following year for explorer John C. Fremont, then renamed again in 1857 for Naval Commander Robert F. Stockton, 3 identities in 11 years, for a town whose lake would not even exist for another century. Today, Stockton Lake is known for water so clear that scuba divers travel from well outside the state to use it. Alongside sailors who take advantage of a dependable southwest breeze, the surrounding open plateau creates almost every afternoon. A historic courthouse still stands on the town square, one of only 2 downtown buildings that survived a tornado that tore through Stockton in 2003. A quiet reminder that this small town has already rebuilt itself more than once and kept going anyway. Housing here remains genuinely affordable, with a median value around $144,000 and median rent under $800 a month. Though Stockton's own documented tornado history is worth factoring honestly into any homeowner's insurance conversation before signing anything. Number 3 is Hermitage, county seat of Hickory County, with a population of just 621 people according to the 2020 census, sitting on the Pomme de Terre River, where it feeds into Pomme de Terre Lake. The town was founded in 1846 and named after the Tennessee estate of Andrew Jackson, and a year later, it became the seat of a county that was itself named for Jackson's nickname, Old Hickory. The lake beside it did not arrive until well over a century later. An Army Corps of Engineers reservoir now covering close to 8,000 acres at Normal Pool, prized nationally for one very specific reason: muskellunge, the muskie, a trophy predator fish that does not naturally reproduce in these waters and has to be stocked every spring by the state's conservation department just to keep the fishery alive. Anglers travel from across the country chasing what is considered one of the best muskie catch ratios anywhere. And yet the town supporting all of that remains barely large enough to fill a school gymnasium, its economy today running almost entirely on the lake behind it. This is, by the numbers, one of the cheapest places to own property on this entire list, with a median home value estimated around $126,000 and median rent under $700 a month. Though a poverty rate reported near half the population is a real signal that services, job opportunities, and shopping options stay limited here in ways a bigger lake town would not. Before we get to the final 2, if you have made it this far, it means these hidden corners of the map matter to you as much as they matter to me, so take a second and subscribe if you have not already. It genuinely helps this channel keep finding places like these, and keep telling me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Number 2 brings us to Warsaw, sitting on a peninsula jutting into Truman Lake in Benton County, home to somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 residents, depending on the count you use. This is a town built almost entirely around access to the water. Harry S. Truman State Park occupies land on that same peninsula, with a marina where visitors rent boats to chase crappie, catfish, white bass, hybrid striped bass, and walleye across one of the largest reservoirs in the state. The Benton County Museum keeps records stretching back to 1835, a full decade before Missouri's smaller counties were even carved into their current borders. And healthcare here is anchored by a dedicated facility built specifically to serve the lake community rather than folded in as an afterthought to a larger regional hospital elsewhere. Warsaw sits under 2 hours from Kansas City, close enough for family visits, far enough to feel like an entirely different pace of life once you cross into town. The math backs that up directly. Median home value around $188,000. Median rent close to $920 a month. Numbers that make Warsaw one of the most balanced entries on this entire list between affordability and actual infrastructure. It is affordable, it is established, and on almost any other list, a town like this would be the payoff at the very top. But this list has one more stop, and it is not like any of the 11 that came before it. Number 1 is Florida, Missouri. And there is a real chance you have heard of this place without ever knowing exactly where it was. Laid out in the winter of 1831 in Monroe County, Florida sits at the intersection of Missouri Route 107 and State Route U, right on the shore of Mark Twain Lake. In 1835, a boy named Samuel Clemens was born here in a small 2-room cabin and grew up to take the pen name Mark Twain, becoming one of the most recognized voices in American literature. At its peak, around 1910, Florida had a recorded population of 200 people. Today, according to the 2020 census, it has 5. Not 500. 5. The lake that now shares Twain's name was not created until the 20th century, when the Salt River was dammed to form an 18,600-acre reservoir. And in the process, water quietly rose around the very town that gave the world one of its greatest storytellers, shrinking Florida down to almost nothing, while simultaneously turning its surroundings into a destination visited by roughly 2 million people a year. The Mark Twain Birthplace State Historic Site sits right there in the middle of it, preserving the cabin inside Mark Twain State Park, drawing visitors who come to see where the writer began, then leave without ever noticing that the town around the site barely qualifies as one anymore. 5 people live where a legend was born, on the shore of a lake built long after he left, in a place so small it almost does not register as a place at all. And yet, it is permanently written into the history of this country. Financially, Florida is almost impossible to evaluate the way we have evaluated everything else on this list. Real estate tracking sites that report median home values for every other town in Monroe County simply have no figure on record for Florida at all, because there is no active market to measure. No recent sales, no listings, nothing. That is not a marketing gap. It is the honest result of a town with 5 residents and most likely 0 homes for sale in any given year. If you want to live in Florida, Missouri, you are not shopping a listing site. You are waiting for a neighbor to decide to sell, which tells you everything about how permanent this tiny population really is. If there is a single image that captures what this entire list has been about, quiet, overlooked corners of Missouri holding far more weight than their size would ever suggest, it might be this one. A 5-person village on a man-made lake, forever known and forever preserved as the birthplace of Mark Twain. 12 lakes, 12 towns, and not one national headline between them, which is exactly the point. From a 9,000 person county seat down to a 5-person village that happens to be the birthplace of one of the greatest writers this country has ever produced, Missouri keeps its best kept secrets along shorelines most people only ever see from a highway bridge at 70 miles an hour. None of these towns need a fortune to call home. Most of them barely need a full paycheck. If one of these towns caught your attention, or if you already call one of them home, tell us which one in the comments and let us know where you are watching from tonight. There are more lakes, more forgotten towns, and more stories like these still waiting on the map. So if you want to keep exploring them with us, you know exactly what to do. See you in the next one.